Hello, everyone. This is Marc Sabatella from the Mastering MuseScore School. Welcome to the Music Masterclass. So this is my weekly series that I do on Thursdays where we talk about making music and kind of demonstrate some things that I'm working on or that I'm interested in. And we take a look at the pieces that you are writing, that you are arranging, that you're creating. And I give my feedback and we all try to learn from each other, learn together. So hope everyone's ready for some day. We'll be working on some spring songs, but also counterpoint. So I'm happy to see everyone checking in here. Always happy to see that. And let me reset my volume. There we go. Okay, so I mentioned, so we've been doing this spring challenge that, I said, let's all try to write some songs about spring. And a couple people have submitted some. I'd still love to see some more. So I'll just kind of keep that running basically through April. There's no competition. It's just an opportunity to try to stretch yourself by doing something that maybe you wouldn't have done otherwise this month. So we're writing songs about spring or thinking about it. And I want to talk about a piece that I wrote many years ago, and some of the issues that came up in doing this. And so that's one of the things that I'm going to talk about today. So there is a piece, I just added it to the group. And actually, let me get that link there. So this is the Music Masterclass group on musescore.com. There we go. And this is where, once you've uploaded any pieces to musescore.com, you can post them there. And if you're not using MuseScore, because this isn't necessarily just about MuseScore, and if you want to have other files that you've uploaded to YouTube or whatever, that's fine. You can still create an account here, but you can just post it directly to the course on my school, and that pinned up at the top is the link to my Mastering MuseScore School, where you can actually enroll here for free and post the comments there and so forth. So and check out the other courses, blah blah blah. So I want to talk about this one score of mine called The Last Day of Spring. And okay, so the premise here is, we always talk about how lovely the first day of spring is, but we never talk about the last day, right? We never talk about the end of spring. So that's kind of what this song is about. And it actually is kind of like a follow-up to the song I was talking about last week, You Must Believe in Spring, which is a beautiful song by Michel Legrand, lyrics by Alan and Marilyn Bergman. And this was sort of my sort of darker take on this. And I'm going to just play on the piano because my original conception of the piece was just like piano and vocal, basically. So, lilacs and roses were blossoming everywhere. The sounds and the fragrance of pinkness filled the air. So that's the basic vibe of the piece. It's very rubato. Last week, I remember someone making a comment that, a bass player couldn't follow along with that. Yeah, this is not meant to be followed along with. I've never tried to perform this from the lead sheet with anything other than just piano and voice. It'd be possible to get people to follow along, but that's not what it was meant for. And so I had kind of an arrangement. I don't play it exactly the same every time on the piano because it is a lead sheet. I didn't write out an arrangement, but I kind of had an idea of approximately how it would go, and it's always more or less that same idea. But I decided one day I wanted to write a string quartet arrangement of this, and for voice and string quartet. And it turned out there's not actually all that much music written for that type of ensemble, voice with string quartet. Because I was looking for inspiration and checked out what examples I could find, but I was a little surprised at the time. This was 15 years ago, ish, yeah. And there was, a surprising dearth, is that the right word, of music for voice and string quartet. So a number of the questions that I might have wanted to ask myself, I couldn't get a good answer for by looking at the existing work, and I just had to come up with my own answers. So one of them that comes up anytime you're trying to write an arrangement of a vocal piece for um, any sort of instrumental ensemble is, do you put the melody in the arrangement? In other words, like when I played this, I kind of played, if you look at my top notes here, D, C sharp, B flat, A. So I kind of hinted at lilacs and roses blossoming everywhere. So I'm using the top note of my voicing to kind of hint at the melody. I don't do that throughout the piece. The next part, I could feel the breath of life, it tasted so sweet this year. And I'm playing voicings on my piano where the top note of my voicing is not what I'm singing. It's well above what I'm singing. But of course, I'm singing in a kind of a baritone range here. And so, of course, the right hand of the piano is going to be above that. But if someone is actually singing this in the octave where it's actually written, which is, a female voice would have to be singing it there, the question is, uh, should I try to keep the accompaniment below that? Because that would often be a thing, right? You keep the accompaniment below the melody. Well, the answer is no, you can't do that. You can't expect to write a string quartet arrangement and have it always be below the melody, because your strings are going to be way too low all the time. So if you're trying to write an arrangement for string quartet or any sort of instrumental ensemble like that, really, other than maybe a trombone or tuba ensemble or something, you're going to have the top voices of your instrumental ensemble above the melody. Maybe one voice in the ensemble will actually double the melody. Maybe some of them will be above, and that's fine. So I'm going to show you now the string quartet arrangement that I did. And I did this. So I see some other questions here about enharmonic spelling. And yeah, F sharp and G flat, same button on the piano, spelt different, exactly as we discussed last week. So again, I'll encourage you to check out the handouts that I make in my theory course, where I kind of explain all about why notes are spelled the way they are. So this piece, actually, I presented on my master's recital. When I got my master's degree in composition, I created this piece while I was a student working on my master's, and so this was on my master's recital. And there was this, I had a girl who was a freshman of jazz vocal major who actually sang on it, and students played the string quartet. And one of the decisions that I had to make also was rhythmically. If you look at my original lead sheet here, it's basically all in 4/4. I think at one point, instead of notating quarter note triplets, I actually notated that in 6/8 and then changed my mind and went to 4/4 for the lead sheet. I think my original handwritten version was 6/8. Not sure. I don't remember. But I feel like it might have been. This, though, if you think about how I played that, so this is like the beat. So I'm playing that in rhythm now, but that's not really how I did it, right? There was a lot more push and pull to that. A lot more. Not just a little bit, but a lot. This measure is lasting like as long as the previous two put together. And drawing this part out. And so there's like 3 different verses to this, and I would actually do that differently depending on how the lyrics go in there also. And one of the things that I've experimented with, and I think pretty successfully, is what I would call notated rubato. And so if you look at my string quartet arrangement here, where is it? Oh, I'm looking at the voice part. Uh, you'll see, actually, let me go back to the voice part. I actually have all these time signature changes written in now. So it's like ba da 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 do da 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 do da do da. So I'm notating longer and shorter measures by actually putting extra beats into them rather than writing rubato and trying to get five college students who are, they worked on this. They practiced it for a couple of weeks before the concert, but it was, it wasn't like they got to live with this music for a year or anything like that. So I wanted to give them a good chance of success, and I found this with professional ensembles also, that if I try to conduct, I'm not a good conductor. I've learned some things, but I'm not good at it. And if I try to take an instrumental ensemble and conduct them and try to get them to do all the sort of rubato kind of stuff that I want, it's hard. And partially it's because they're not used to playing. If they're mostly jazz musicians, they're not used to playing this way. They're not used to feeling this together. They don't know the piece, and I'm not good at conveying it as a conductor. So it's often easier for me to just write the rubatos in. And so when I say write them in, I don't mean write the word rubato. I mean change time signature. If I want this, if I want a passage to take longer than 4 beats, instead of saying 4 beats but play them slower, I'll write 6 beats. And so that's essentially what I did here. So let me do this. I'll have this clarinet part playing the melody. So those 6 beats right there, that was originally 4/4. It was originally ba da do da da do don 2 3 4 ba da dum. So it was 4 beats. But in my arrangement, it's 1 3 4 1 2 3 4 1 2 3 1 2 3 1 2 3 4. Right? So I actually switched to 3/4 and made 2 bars of 3/4. I could have called it 6/8, 1 bar of 6/4. But by stretching it out that way, I didn't have to get people to think about a change in tempo. I just had to get them to count. And that turns out to be easier. Yeah, it's easier to get a group of people to count together. If it was just one person, rubato works great. They can just take their own liberties. But if you're trying to get 5 people to feel something together, letting them actually count is often a good way of doing it. So, and when I talk about like the degree to which the melody is in there, so right here, I do have the strings below the melody. So they started off, all the strings are below the melody, right? The melody is the D, the top violin is F sharp. Melody is C, top violin is G sharp. Then, for like 3 notes, I'm letting the violin double the melody. And so one of the decisions I had to make, as I said, am I going to take one of those instruments and have it double the melody? Well, 2 reasons I say no. One is I've only got 4 violins, and I've got some fairly rich sounding chords that I wanted to be able to express. And I needed all 4 strings to be able to do that. I couldn't have one of them just double the melody and still get the richness I wanted out of the chords. I couldn't have a full major 7th chord and add a 9th, and I can't. You can't do all this kind of stuff if one person's having to double the melody. But there's places where I thought it would be helpful to double the melody for the vocalist, and places where I thought it just sounded good. So I let that happen. But then at this point, now the melody is below the violin. Right? The melody is the D here, and the first violin is above it, starting on a G. And now it stays above. The violin is above by quite a lot. I mean, at this point, the violin is over an octave above that melody. And that's with a female voice singing it. But realistically, it works also if I take the entire melody down an octave. Let me just do that for a second. If I take that whole thing down an octave, just to make it So if I were actually intending it to be sung by a man, I might have changed some of those string voicings around a little bit, but I still would have made a lot of the same decisions of saying, well, I'm going to obviously let the strings go above. I might have changed the voicing, so who was doubling the melody? I might have let the viola double the melody instead of the first violin, for instance. Or maybe not. Maybe I'd let the first violin double an octave higher. That's okay. That's fine also. But I would have made decisions like uh, the spacing of the notes. Like if you actually think about the spacing of the notes here, at this point, let's look at that last note. The vocalist is on this G, the first violinist is on the C, second violinist is doing a double stop, an F and an A together, and the viola is on a D. All of those notes are above that G, and then we finally have the bass note below. So that note, I kind of created room for the voice note within the chord. I got all these notes kind of stacked up higher. There's other places where maybe the voice is in the middle. And that's probably the case. I'm looking for places where maybe it's the case, and who knows? Maybe right here, this F is, yeah, because the violin one is above that on the D. The second violin is on the A, also above it, but the viola is on a B, the B below middle C. So it's below that F. So what I really have is first violin here on the D, the second violin here on the A, and the voice is here on the F, and the viola is down here on the B. It's a B minor 7 flat 5, B half diminished chord, but I left room for that F. If I take that F down an octave, which is where I personally would have had to sing it, now suddenly the voice is on the bottom of that texture. Well, I might have changed that then. Instead of giving this B to the viola down here, I might have given it to the cello, so it could be down here, so that the bass note could be below the melody. So I might have had to make some adjustments like that. So would 6/4 have been better for the thing? Yeah, maybe so. It's I could have called this 1/6/4 measure. I think the fact that the chord changed in the middle of it made me want to just call it 3/4 and be easier. But I don't think anything about this piece and nothing about the piece feels like, no, you're going to play it like a waltz or anything. So I don't think that merely singing a couple 3/4 measures is going to cause people to do that. Now there are some more rhythmic passages, like right where I left off. Just that it's like a flowing kind of feel there. And so I'm using different rhythmic feels. Here's one where then the triplets, the quarter note triplets, are echoed in all the strings in kind of different kind of contrary motion. So this part right here, again, I did this little game where I stretched things out. This measure became a 2/4 measure, this measure a 3/4 measure, but with dotted quarter notes in it, because this was the clearest way I could find to notate the particular stretch that I had in mind. Yes, I could have called those quarter notes with little fermatas over them, but I found this was an effective way to do it. And yeah, there's all sorts of judgment calls that one gets to make in doing this kind of stuff. So yeah, there's a couple of 3/4s I could have called 6/4. Just going on. this passage here, I talked about counterpoint, and we use that word as if it's synonymous with imitative counterpoint and fugues and all that, but it's not, right? It's anytime you deliberately have moving lines, independent melodic lines that make sense in themselves, that are not all moving together, basically. And so that's what's happening here. Our melody is that's our melody, but the violin is and meanwhile the second violin has right, and cello whoops so each of these lines is very independent rhythmically. There's not a single place where everyone has the same rhythm in here. Like two people have eighth notes, but a couple have quarter notes there. They're kind of working together, but the violin and the cello have a different rhythm against that, and it kind of keeps shifting as we get to this measure. And also think about how the melody is fitting in there. The triplets in the melody are picked up by the violin, but no one else has those. Someone else just has an eighth note and someone else has a quarter note. That's counterpoint, right? It's having multiple rhythms at once that build this kind of lush texture that I'm going for. I maybe overdid it, and I like how it came out. I totally did. The actual performance on the recital went really well. I wish I could find the recording of it. But the overall flow, because I could have just written simple chords and gave everyone footballs, as we call them, just give everyone whole notes and half notes just to express the chords and let the voice express the melody. But that technique works if you have a rhythm section, if you have piano, bass, and drums, or guitar, or whatever, playing something more rhythmic. When you're just dealing with a quartet, a string quartet, as your rhythm section, then someone's got to keep that pulse going, and it shouldn't be one person's job. It shouldn't just be the cellist's job to keep a pulse going. I want to kind of spread that work around so that this flow keeps happening. Let me just play a little bit further. So here it's I'm changing the texture. I'm losing all those running eighth notes because I'm really trying to make, and this is about trying to emphasize what's going on lyrically. I believed, period, in, period, spring. That thing that you do where you put a period after each word to emphasize it. You don't do it with a long sentence like that, right? But it's like a thing people do in like Facebook posts and so forth. So that's really what's going. I believed in spring. And so I wanted to interrupt that flow, and then I start the flow up again. So this next section is a section where I would have improvised on the piano. It's just a 2-chord vamp. It's a G minor 7 and then a G major 7. G sharp minor 7, sorry. G minor 7. It's a vamp there, and I improvise over that. But none of these players were jazz players. I wasn't going to ask them to improvise. So I wrote out, essentially wrote out an improvised solo. And wrote it out for first violin, and then created accompaniment against it that I was striving for something that felt like the accompaniment worked with that melody, but also felt like it's the kind of accompaniment maybe a pianist might have come up with who didn't know what was going to be improvised. Because if I'm playing the piano behind someone who's improvising, I'm trying to play things that make sense rhythmically, but don't get in the way of the improviser, and I listen to the improviser and try to do things with them rhythmically, but it's not like perfectly lined up like if I composed it. So that's what I was going for here, trying to compose something that would feel improvised. I just want to point out that like all these places now are masking the strings to do double stops. Yeah, you can do that if you just have to sit on like one note. And I worked out with my little string diagram thing, which double stops are actually playable, and then checked with the players to be sure I was reading it right. But notice that this is really like a rhythmic thing that they're doing together. I probably have the notes wrong, but actually that's right. That is a B. So this is something I might have played on the piano, maybe. And so I'm treating now the strings more like a piano, not trying to create all this texture in the accompaniment, but letting the other strings be a simpler, a simpler statement of the chords, because I want the violin one to be kind of doing all the fancy stuff on top of that. That's basically the end of the solo, the improvised solo. So, relative to the discussion about chromatic scales and so forth, yes, the tradition is you spell with sharps on the way up, flats on the way down, and it's for a couple reasons, and we can actually see it in effect right here. One of the reasons is to avoid too many accidentals. So if I have a descending line, oh, come on, there's got to be a chromatic line in there somewhere. Uh, well, just for instance, this F sharp here is spelt as an F sharp so that when it resolves to the G by half step, you can see F sharp to G. If I'd spelt it as G flat, then you would have two notes on the same line in the context of that melody, and it makes it a little harder to read. Also, this G natural, I didn't really need that G natural. That's a courtesy natural. I could have not used it. And so often when you're writing a chromatic scale, by spelling with sharps on the way up, you avoid the need for natural signs on all the white notes, and vice versa if you spell with flats on the way down. So in the structure of the song, the first song, I mean, it's got a melancholy vibe. You know it's not going to have a happy ending, but it's all about happy stuff, right? It's like lilacs and roses are blossoming everywhere. And the next verse is, my love for you was a fountain of youth for my soul. It's happy, yay, spring, good. I believed in spring. I believed in love. And it's like, okay, but you sort of get the sense, if I've done my job right, that maybe it's not going to all be lilacs and roses. And so by the end of the solo, that's what I want to establish here. That right there was a deceptive cadence, right? Because originally it was, I believed in spring, I believed in love, believed in love, going to a B major chord, F sharp, going to B. But in this part, it's I believed in love. So I'm going to the minor chord. That's how you know not going to turn out so well, right? Now really, the slowest part in the rhythms here, because this is now stretched out. Originally, this was burn so brightly, I thought, and this whole thing was like only 2 measures, and now it's gonna be like 4 measures, including a 5/4 bar. So it's, again, the rubato is written out, but it's written out in a way that really stretches things out, and all that moving, flowing stuff is gone. Now it's more stately and staying out of the way. So that's the termination of that little interlude there. Nature doesn't work that way. Like, oh, okay, yeah, here it comes. So then the last verse is then Yeah, it's just some other version of the same kind of stuff. Never know how things go. This little passage here, my instructor told me not to do. That is like a totally jazzism, drop two voicing. I don't remember the exact chords, and I can't really read four different staves with one of them being in viola clef. But it's this whole passage of basically a string section solely. And his comment to me was that those drop two voicing solely sections just don't sound as good with strings as you think they're going to. But I had to do it anyhow because I'm stubborn. And I did it, and I think it did work. So whatever it was he was hearing or wasn't hearing, that's fine. I don't do it a lot. I don't do a lot of this type of texture, these eighth notes in parallel motion, where I have these voicings, or that's a very saxophone jazz saxophone section thing to do, and I don't do it much, but I did it there. So the whole song tells a story. I think of it as a jazz art song, jazz-ish, right? It was maybe more obviously jazz if I play it on the piano. It's not the kind of song where in a typical jazz setting, hey, we're going to play the head, it's 32 measures, and then we solo, and then we just sing the same song again at the end. What's even the point? That I've always thought that was like a really silly convention, but it goes back hundreds of years, right? That's what a sonata is. Sonata form, you do the melody, you do all the development stuff, and then you have your recapitulation, play the melody again. Okay, that's fine, especially for instrumental music. But if you're writing a song that's telling a story, why tell the whole story and then tell the story again? That always feels very artificial to me, very strange to me, especially if the story has any sort of twist. It's not gonna have the same effect the second time. So I'd rather put that improvised section in the middle. So I have all the happy stuff with maybe a slight foreshadowing that things aren't going to go that well. Then open it up for the development, or in this case, improvisation, perhaps, and then have that final verse where you kind of wrap up the story. So that's anytime you're telling a story in a song. Yeah, I definitely recommend that sort of thing. Don't finish the story before the song, is over. If you're going to have any sort of development or improvisation, um, if you're going to have any sort of improvisation, then or development section, instrumental development section, do it in the middle of the story. Find the right place to interrupt the story for the interlude, and then finish out your story. So actually, I would say this piece worked pretty well with the strings. Intonation was really the problem, because there's just a lot of chromatic stuff going on in here. By chromatic, I don't necessarily mean a chromatic scale, but I just mean just passages, like that one in particular, where you're having to play this line that's got F, G, F sharp, and then G sharp. And these are hard to sing. They're really hard to sing, but they're also hard to tune on the violin, because you're used to kind of setting your hand in a position and playing it. And then there's awkwardnesses in this. And certainly all the places where there's minor, like flat chords with flats in them, are also hard to tune on the violins, on strings in general. So I would say that was the biggest struggle, was intonation on this. But they really actually did a very good job. And then I did perform it with a professional ensemble also, but again, under rehearsed. So, oh yeah, the question about beaming. Um, so in the old days, it was common to not beam eighth notes. So I don't have a whole lot of eighth notes here, but here's some, right? So after such a glorious season. The old standard, by old I mean say more than 150 years ago, was to then not beam because they're individual syllables. The only time you would beam eighth notes 150 years ago was a melisma. So if you had like, well, the classic example, Gloria, right? That's a melisma. Anytime you have that type of figure, you beam. And if you have individual syllables, you don't beam. At least that's the old style. People have gotten away from that as we write more complicated rhythms because seeing the beaming is such an important clue to how the rhythms go. So if you're going to have anything at all complex in the rhythms, it's going to pay to use the more instrumental style of beaming, where we beam in beat groups. We beam according to the meter. So I certainly recommend that unless you're specifically trying to duplicate an old arrangement. But there's a plugin that I downloaded called Traditional Vocal Beaming, and when I select that, it automatically goes through and breaks all the beams. It looks at the lyrics, figures out where the melismas are, and breaks beams that need to be broken. I don't think I actually have any melismas in this song, so you wouldn't get to see that unless I actually edited it. But if I change this from suddenly to just well, I have to delete words. I don't want to do that. I don't want to mess it up. Take my word for it. That plugin, if you download it from the plugins page on MuseScore, it will. That plugin does a pretty good job of automating that. So that's what I would recommend. All right, so this is some of the things. I just wanted to go through the piece and to sort of talk through a lot of the decisions that I had to make about how to create this arrangement and have it work. And yeah, it actually did work quite well on the on both my recital and then a couple later professional recordings that were made of it. Not professional recordings, I should say, but live performances. So they still don't have good recordings either. So as far as mixing flats and sharps, so there is no key for this. That's a good point to this. This piece there's no key signature on it, not because it's in the key of C, but because look at these first four chords: G major, F sharp minor, C minor, F7, B flat, A flat, B minor, E7. There is not a single key that's got even three of those chords, right? I mean, here, C minor, F7, B flat. Okay, key of B flat. Okay, but none of the other chords. Major, no. F sharp, no. A flat major, no. B minor, E7, A minor, none of those chords belong in the key of B flat. We're not in the key of B flat, even though we get another little 5 to 1 in B flat, and then a 5 to 1 in F. We get to see little hints of 5 to 1. Here's 2, 5, 1, D minor. Here's 2, 5, 1, C. This is the language of a lot of modern jazz. You see little bits of 2-5-1s here and there, but they just wander so fast from key to key that you never really get to keep your bearings. And there'll be some places like beginning. There's no two chords in a row there that could have come from the same key. Well, I guess G and F sharp could have come from D major, but they didn't because that's not the key I'm in. Although there is a C sharp in the melody, so maybe there is. Anyhow, this language is the language of a lot of modern jazz. You could say it owes its roots to the late Romantic impressionist type of composers, but it doesn't sound like Debussy either. So it's hard to really even pin where it comes from. It's just a big part of the language of modern jazz. So yeah, I wanted to talk through some of those issues because a lot of different things came up in doing this, in doing that arrangement that I thought would be interesting to talk about. So I also, as always, like to want to be looking at some of your music, some of the things that you guys have submitted. So I'm going to come over where I can sit a little more comfortably and work with my laptop, on my lap. And look at some pieces that were submitted. And the thing is, there's still not a whole lot of spring music coming up yet. I'm still kind of waiting for everyone to kind of get some stuff together. I'm trying to get my phone back here so I can make sure I'm seeing the. So I would say this isn't atonal exactly. I mean, if it were atonal, we wouldn't be seeing little 2-5-1s. We wouldn't be seeing chords at all. In atonal music, you'd expect much less of that kind of thing. So this is. There's not a good word for it. I would sometimes call it non-tonal to indicate that, well, it's not about having a key center, but atonal just has such specific connotations that we're not going to have anything resembling a chord in it, and that's not the case here. So the word atonal just doesn't quite work, but it is true that it is without a tonal center. So non-tonal is my best word for it. So as far as some of the pieces that were submitted, I do want to talk about some things here. And since I've been kind of going back and forth talking about Counterpoint, and a whole bunch of different fugues and similar pieces have been submitted lately, I actually want to show one here. And unfortunately, why am I not seeing it? Oh, because it's sorted not the way I want it sorted. Let's sort by date. How about that? Okay, here we go. So I want to talk about Sam's piece here. That's a fugue in A minor, and it's a short fugue. And this was a really cool project. Several people have decided to like just challenge themselves to write a short fugue every week and all start with the same subjects. Kind of cool idea. Um, so yes, William, I'd say, yeah, well, I'm bouncing around from key to key without landing anywhere long enough. So the theme that was given was here, and this that was the theme, basically. I think that was all there was to it. And then everything after that was, added by the individual composers. And so Sam wrote this fugue that works. It's a short fugue. They're all supposed to be less than a minute, and so I'm going to play it for you. But then he actually asked some really specific questions, and this is great because it really gives me some good focus to what I can say about it. So first, I'm just going to play the piece. All right, really nice job, Sam. I actually had not listened to the entire piece all the way through. I'd been checking out the sections that he had questions on. So possibly you heard exactly the same thing I did. Oh, measure 3 parallel fifth. I heard a different one. But yeah, there's all sorts of things to talk about here. And lots of and actually, what are you seeing with the parallel fifth? Measure 3 parallel fifth, really? I guess uh, uh, if you're talking about the C to F sharp and then B to E, if you're talking about that, I don't hear that as problematic because this one here is a diminished fifth, but maybe you're talking about something else. The thing is, I often make the point about rules being, there are things that you follow if you want a particular result. It's like a recipe. If you want to sound like Baroque music, you follow these same sets of principles that they follow, and you'll end up sounding Baroque. Doesn't mean you have to do those things. It means you do those things or it doesn't sound Baroque, right? So there's a lot of things going on in here that I can point to. The thing that I actually heard was over here, I think. No, it wasn't there. It was a passage like that where there was some kind of, oh, here. I can hear this, the D to D there between the bass voice and the soprano voice, and then the C to C here between the bass and soprano voice again. So I hear the two consecutive Cs. Yes, the soprano voice has other notes in there that are obscuring that. It's not it's not the most obvious to look at, but my ear actually did hear it. And yeah, so sometimes you can do things and the ear hears it, and sometimes you do things and the ear doesn't hear it as well. And it also depends on whose ears they are. So if Vasily's talk about, so Vasily, I'm going to talk about his fugue next week or maybe the week after, depending on whatever, I guess. But yeah, you've done absolutely incredible work. I mean, he's got some absolutely incredible work in his fugues, and I'm really looking forward to spending a lot of time on one. But I want to first talk about Sam's here because it's a good step here in that there's a lot of stuff that's really done well, and then there's some questions that he has that we can talk about. So I'm going to open up the questions here and get to those. But I do want to just come back to that question about the parallel fifth thing. This C to F sharp, that is a dissonance, right? So that dissonance we generally want to resolve. And he is resolving it here by taking the C to the B, the F sharp to G. Now it is true that immediately after that, we get another parallel, we get another fifth there from B to E. But in between there was a resolution. To my ears, that makes it okay enough. Now, the question is, would Bach have done that, or would he have found another alternative? Maybe he would have. But there's a lot of there's definitely room for negotiation on that point, I guess is what I will say. So I'm going to I'll just close this up so I can get this easier. So he's got a lot of very specific questions in here, and I want to talk about some of those specific questions because by entering by having uploaded this new score, so Sam did the actual fugue, and then he uploaded this other score here where he's got his own questions in text frames interspersed with the music from the actual fugue. And this is great because now it makes it really easy for me to answer specific questions. So this is fantastic. I will encourage people, if you're uploading stuff and you want specific feedback on things, create things like this, and I'll be all over them. So here comes first thing. Measure 8 to 9, bass goes up. And so he's talking about in measure 8, the bass is going up E to A. The top voice is going down D to C sharp. Yes, with the B in between there. The middle voice is going up basically B to E. This is the middle voice. It kind of changed clef, changed which staff it was on. And so what he's asking for, he's asking about the intervals that are formed here. The bass and middle voice form, oh, wait a minute. Now I'm losing track of what he's talking about. The diminished seventh. Bass and middle voice form a diminished seventh. Which diminished seventh are you talking about? That resolves outward. All right, so now I'm not following the bass in measure 8, or maybe you're talking about measure 9 at this point. To be honest, Sam, I'm not sure which diminished seventh you mean. Yeah, so I'm not sure which diminished seventh you mean right here. And it seems like when I looked at this before, I thought I knew what you meant, but now I don't. So, because that's a minor seventh, and maybe that's what you mean. Maybe that's all you mean. Yeah, I think that's what you mean. This E to D is a minor seventh. I'm just going to interpret it that way, and it resolves outward by the D going up to E. Now, I will tell you that is. Again, rules are guidelines to help you create sounds that sound familiar. And I would say that, yeah, in general, sevenths don't resolve that way. However, I think your real problem is different. I think your actual problem is that this D, it's not so much that it wanted to resolve outward, but this D is the seventh of the chord. That D really wanted, that's the seventh of the chord, it really wanted to resolve down to the third of the next. We have an E7 chord, a 5 of 5. That seventh is supposed to come down to the third. The real problem is, well, you already did that here, right? And had you done that, had you made this voice come down, let me move it to the bottom staff just to make it a little clearer that it really is the same voice here. Had you actually moved that down to a C sharp, then you would have had more parallel octaves. Yeah, sort of, right? This D to that D. They're not even simultaneously, but I hear them. I would hear the two Ds followed by the two C sharps, and I would hear the doubled chromatic note, the altered note. We usually don't double notes outside the key. If we're trying to talk about tonal music and we're trying to talk about uh, the key of A minor, that C sharp is a note that comes from the major key. We normally wouldn't double it. So between the fact that it feels like I've got two Ds going to C sharps, creating some sort of parallel octave situation, um, between that and the fact that that note is a non-diatonic note, I probably don't want to double it. It's good that you didn't do that. It's good you didn't go where that should have gone. So in that case, going up to the E is maybe the best way to go. But the real question is here, did you need the D? Maybe that to me is the question. Nothing here is part of an imitation, right? I mean, this is measure 8 of your piece, and that's 5, 6, 7, 8. At that point, the middle voice has just completed its statement of the subject. So everything from this point on, unless you're actually counting do 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 do, is part of your subject because you do use it. Okay, you use that every time, so maybe that is part of your subject. But in any case, it stopped after the B, right? This D did not need to be there. So that could have been your other way out. Is instead of going up to the D, you could have taken it down to G sharp and then let it resolve to A. I don't know. I haven't thought that through, but that is the kind of thing. So, Sam, yes, good to see you here. Um, so, uh, so yeah, that's what I might have considered, and I actually think that actually probably does work pretty well, even though I haven't thought it through in any great deal. It's easy for me to, miss. Oh, did I create a parallel this, or did I double that, or did I do something else I won't like? But I kind of feel like if you are there's a lot of stuff that happens when you're basically creating something within a seventh chord. And as soon as one voice has stated a seventh, which this voice has up here, you kind of want to say, okay, you got the seventh. If you take that seventh away from him by moving to another voice, and so your original version that had the D here, if you had not taken that B up to C sharp, that also would have been a possibility, right? Take that down to an A and take this down to C sharp. Now, I don't like that nearly as much because the D was so prominent in that sound. It really, that is the D I wanted to resolve. This D here is gratuitous. I don't think it added anything. So it created a problem for you to solve that you didn't need to solve. So that would have been my answer. You could have gone up to an E. You could have stayed where you were. Had you gone to an E and tied over, that could have been fine also. Let's try that. Let's see what that sounds like. Yeah, that could have been fine too. Oh, that tie basically didn't really work because this T's on another staff, so you'd have had to use cross staff notation actually to get that to work right. But in any case, that is my answer there. I think you were right to ask the question, but I think it's not so much about the interval resolving, it's about the D resolving to C sharp, and one of them didn't, and something's a little funny about that seventh. To me, that's maybe more to the point. Now, in measure 9, so I remember looking at this one. You've labeled all your intervals, which is great, and your question was about a resolution here. And your question was, the diminished fifth here not really being resolved. And my general feeling about this setting here, because basically you're arpeggiating a chord here, right? This is all one chord, harmonically speaking. You're basically taking an A dominant seventh chord with a flat nine, to use a jazzer way of looking at it, or you're moving freely between the A chord and the C sharp diminished chord, which would be a more classical way of looking at it. It's the same difference. In doing that, it's going to be the case that you're going to have dissonances between different voices. If you take one chord and arpeggiate all the way up and down that seventh isn't going to resolve, right? Or if you take two voices and move them around in thirds, one of them is going to be dissonant against the bass at some point, and then when you come back down, you didn't resolve it exactly. Some amount of that's inevitable if you're arpeggiating within a chord, at least if you're arpeggiating within a seventh chord. So to some extent, yeah, you can totally get away with that. But I'll tell you what bothers me more is the double D. This, to me, is more the problem. I feel like the doubled E here was a lost opportunity. And if this little if that's necessary for your imitation scheme, then you might have to live with it. But I think it probably isn't. And I think had this been a half note, and then I probably wouldn't have done that leap down. I probably would have done something different at that point. But the point is, you want to look at this bigger picture. You want to look at really how you're moving between these chord tones, how you're voicing each chord, and if that ends up being a pair of intervals that doesn't specifically resolve, but they move. It's the same principle as changing bass notes within a chord. That's maybe a better way I can even talk about this. If you have a chord in root position and then you have that same chord and then your bass just goes bum 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 bum, moving back and forth between 1 5 1 5 1 while the chord is staying one. That fifth, yes, it's technically a second inversion chord, but we don't worry about it. We just say, no, the bass just went to the fifth, but it's still a root position chord. So when the bass is arpeggiating a chord, we don't worry about the fact that we're creating these inversions and we're not resolving them properly. This is just more of that same kind of thinking. When you're arpeggiating a chord, you allow that to happen. And then the most important thing is the last sound you heard each voice have. Like this C sharp, I definitely want to resolve here. This G, I definitely want to resolve here. This wasn't the last sound, but it was the last sound on the beat. So to me, that's more important. But yeah, I wasn't crazy about the doubling that happened in that. And so you might have to think a little harder about that measure for that reason. So yeah, that is my thinking about that. So yeah, it all kind of works. And totally the everything you are doing would have worked were it not for that doubling. And that's the only thing that to my ears was at all problematic. In fact, if I even change that to an A, why don't I like that? I guess just because it's a second inversion chord, but it's used fine. But I still don't like it. It's not as strong as what you had before. So anyhow, to me, that resolution this way is I wouldn't even be thinking of it as resolution because you haven't changed chord. Maybe that's a bigger point that I can make. Resolutions are usually things that happen when the chord changes. We don't worry about resolving things within a chord. That's what I mean by arpeggiation. You're just moving within the chord. I don't need every single one of those to resolve. Maybe if you use a major seventh in a chord, okay, yeah, I kind of expected that to resolve up to a root, unless it's a jazz context, in which I don't care. So, yeah, that's my answers there. I'm going to go on. So measures 12 to 13, he's asking about the top voice. So this is the exact same situation we had before. And the same situation Vasily was pointing out before. We really have parallel fifths: E, B flat, F, C, right? That's a diminished fifth followed by a perfect fifth. And I think, Vasily, what you had said before, diminished fifth to N5. But N5, do you mean, is N meaning perfect? Is that a Russian thing? Because I can't think of what else N would mean. But you said then, so diminished fifth to maybe natural fifth. Diminished fifth to perfect fifth is normal, but perfect to diminished not. Well, this is the right order then, right? It's a diminished fifth followed by a perfect fifth, as was the other one you pointed out, um, in measure 3, was a diminished fifth, diminished, and a perfect fifth. So maybe I'm not quite following what you were trying to say before. Um, but in any case, in the place that we have here, it's it's yeah, this diminished fifth followed by a perfect fifth, and you, again, your real issue is that you've doubled that B flat. You've doubled that seventh, and so you've invited that, right? Um, you've invited this problem where you've got two sevenths and you don't want to resolve them the same way. Well, that is why we have a rule that says don't double the seventh. It's partially because it's, well, they're all related. It's because it's a tune that it's a note that really wants to go a certain way. You don't double your dissonant notes, your notes that want to move a particular way, because then you're inviting this exact problem. So, did you get away with it here? I don't know, maybe. But then you're following it with this C here. So now I'm hearing the parallel octaves of B flat to C, because I hear B flat to C there, just interrupted temporarily by the A. So I feel like, no, you invited difficulty by doubling that B flat. It's a reason why we don't double notes like that. I'm calling it a seventh because I'm seeing this whole measure as C7. It's a reason why we don't double sevenths, because you're going to encounter that problem every single time. And yeah, maybe you can get away with it, maybe not. So that's my answer. I would have looked for an option that didn't involve doubling the B flat to begin with. That's how I would have tried to do that. So measure 15 to 16, some more parallel octaves. Yeah, I hear that. Yeah, I hear it. I totally hear it. And changing the bottom B flat to an E, yeah, totally could have done that, right? Um, and I feel like one of the reasons I'm not crazy, well, I do like that melody, but it makes me more aware of that doubled E there. The thing is, when you only have 3 notes out of 4, you're already omitting one of your 4 voices, and now you're doubling a chord tone, and you're actually doubling the fifth and omitting the root, right? I mean, this is essentially an A dominant seventh chord that's happening here, even though I never heard an A. I hear the A there. Um, This feels like an odd doubling to me. It's a lot of E, which is the least useful note between the A, the C sharp, the E, the G, and the B flat. Well, I don't want to double the G or the B flat. Those are my tensions. But I'd rather double the A, and I don't have an A at all. That E, I feel like it made the chord a little middle heavy, not bottom heavy, not top heavy, but middle heavy. And the fact that the third voice is gone from that texture accentuates that. It made it really feel hollow here. And so maybe you really want to look at reconfiguring that line completely again, if it's supported by what you're doing, if there's not something that needs to be that way because of the imitation. But yeah, I would think I would think twice about that, and not just because of the parallel octaves, but again, because you're taking a tension note. You're taking a dissonant note. That B flat is the seventh. If we think of this as C sharp diminished, that's our seventh. And it's dissonant against the E, it's dissonant against the C sharp. It wants to come down to the A, and it wants to do it both times. So to me, all the parallelism problems that you might be having in here are really doubling problems. fix the doubling, the parallelism goes away. I have to ask you, though, about this passage, because this fascinated me. That is, when I heard that passage and I saw that A flat going by there, I don't know that that's the same passage. Was there another one that sounds very much like it? I wasn't sure what's going on harmonically there, and I like it. So I would love it if those of you who are like really following what's going on here, and especially, where was it? This one. Yeah, that's just a diminished chord. But this one here, that D diminished chord here, D, F, A flat, then resolving to the A chord here, sounds beautiful to me. And I'm a little bit struggling to understand in my brain why, if you've actually created something that's more like it's got a vibe of being an augmented sixth chord somehow, but I'm not seeing it. So yeah, I'd love to. I mean, voice leading wise, A flat, G makes sense. D coming down to C sharp makes sense. That F coming down to the E makes sense. Everything that's going on here makes sense to me, voice leading wise, but I'm wondering why I don't recognize it harmonically. Yeah, it's a little bit fascinating to me, actually. Anyhow, uh, then the last question here is about measure 16 here. So this dissonance here, by the way, that minor ninth dissonance, yeah, it's a dissonance, and it's the one that's like the most dissonant dissonance there is, but Bach uses it for sure. And you're resolving it by step, although to another dissonance, and then you don't ever get a consonance after it. So yeah, it's it's definitely something that Bach probably would have tried harder to solve than I would. For me, I might be okay with this, but I'm gonna have to live with it a little more. So, I don't know. Uh, you eventually get there, right? These voices are coming together, and that is such a like kind of cliche chromatic things, or not even chromatic, but notes with some dissonance, either because there's chromaticism or just because there's dissonant intervals that converge onto a consonance. Whether that specific combination is one that a Baroque composer would have sanctioned or not, I can't say, but I can say to my ears it's quite pleasing. Ba-da-dum. Now I will say that I'm singing the wrong line, right? So that's what I am hearing. I'm distracted by the fact that this E didn't go to the D. Um, I'm distracted by that. So I'm wondering if you can get away with this, giving me a D for half a beat and then giving me the A. I'm wondering if that works. Well, you end up with this, I don't know, weird octave thing here. You might have to jiggle some other things. But to me, that leap, everything was converging where the way it was converging. I would have been totally prepared for that doubled root there. I would have been totally down for that. Um, and I know at this point you're wrapping up your fugue and you wanted to have your final entrance there, because I think that's the final entrance. Measure 17, do da da da. Yeah, that is the final statement, the final complete statement of your subject. So I I get that you wanted the A there, but I also feel like if you're trying to sell me on this sequence of dissonances that's taking a while to resolve, you might want to go the extra mile and let the ba-da-da-da-dum also go there. I don't know. That's me. That's me putting a modern sensibility, my modern ears, on it. So anyhow, Sam, thank you so much for the piece and the questions, because I found it really useful and interesting to go through this. So for the sake of everyone who's here, I hope you have enjoyed what we've done, taking a look at my spring song and looking at how I tried to adapt it for string quartet, some of the decisions I made along the way, why I made them, what some of the trade-offs were, and then Sam's fugue here, which is really extremely well done, I think. And he had some really valid questions, and I think my bottom line answer is pay attention to doubling. I think by looking a little harder at some of the doubling choices, you wouldn't have to be making some of the parallel octave choices that you're having to make here. So that's maybe an overall thread to some of these comments. So by all means, get in some more songs, get some stuff for me to look at. There's lots of stuff here that I'm going to go in, and Vasily, I mentioned, just has an amazing series of fugues, and there's one in particular that caught my eye and ear that I wanted to talk about, and that's the F minor one. So we're going to look at that soon enough. And I hope you've enjoyed, and I'm going to play out my little theme song so we can hear some music while I talk. So again, hope you've enjoyed this week's episode of the Music Masterclass. My name is Marc Sabatella with the Mastering MuseScore School. By all means, go check out my school, check out the courses that I offer on all the concepts that I talk about are things that I teach in more depth there and in a more organized fashion perhaps, but I love doing these where I can give really specific feedback on particular pieces. It's so much fun for me, and I know it's a really valuable way of learning to look at real pieces and real problem solving. So go out there, make some music, have a great week.